So welcome everybody to the next in our series from the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee of the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. We're very excited to have three amazing panelists with you today to talk about the topic volunteering for the future. So as a bit of context, one of the initiatives from the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee is running a series of webinars that is about engineering our future. And it's looking at addressing how, or speaking about how young engineers are working towards building a better future for us, with a focus particularly on the SDGs. So today, the topic is around volunteering and the impact that volunteering can have on our world. So as an introduction, my name's Nicole Brown, and I'm the Australian representative on the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee. A bit of background on myself is I am an avid volunteer and have been for many years. I currently work as a structural engineer at AECOM, based in Melbourne, Australia. In the past, I've held positions as the global CEO of Robogals, as well as worked with groups such as Engineers Australia and the Queen's Young Leaders program. So to get us started and going straight into the panel, for those that have just joined, I did want to note that there is an opportunity to ask questions. So if you would like to fill out your questions in the Google document that I have just shared, we'll be able to answer them throughout the session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists. We have three incredible volunteers that are working in quite different spaces around the world. So I will give them a chance to introduce themselves and the work that they're doing. But I would like to thank each of them for participating in today's session, Morgan, Fons, and Felicity. So Morgan, did you want to start by introducing yourself to everybody?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks, Nicole, for inviting me to be a panelist today as well. My name's Morgan, and I'm the current CEO of Robogals Global, so following in Nicole's footsteps. I started volunteering in high school, I think, but then the most significant roles that I've held were during university, where I stepped up to Robogals, and I was the president of the Canberra chapter of Robogals, and then did some work with the Asia Pacific Robogals regional team, and now I'm the CEO of the global organisation, which is really exciting. So that's me.
Amazing, and welcome, Morgan. So Fons, did you want to go next?
Yes, good morning here from Europe, from the Netherlands to be precise. My name is Fons Janssen. I'm 25 years old. I've got my engineering background in biotechnology, and regarding volunteering, I started a gap year with a local student union. Then I got involved in the National Chemical Association as a young board member for activities. And then later on, I got engaged in the Dutch Climate Agreement with Young Professionals for Sustainability, made a foundation out of that, and I became a board member afterwards. And now I'm one of the founders of Green Deal for Youth, which is a European-wide network of young professionals and climate activists to increase youth participation in the European Green Deal.
Thank you very much, Fons. And last but not least, Felicity, did you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining, and thanks also to Nicole for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and my volunteering also started when I was at university, getting involved with our Civil Engineering Society, as we call it, CES was the name of that. And then from there, getting involved in women in engineering. But probably my most significant volunteering experience has been co-founding Power of Engineering, which is a not-for-profit which runs free one-day events for girls and regional students to find out about engineering. So it's been an amazing opportunity to learn about leadership, starting that organisation, and I led it for 6 years, and now I sit on our advisory committee. And I'm super excited to talk about volunteering because it's one of my favourite topics, and I think everyone should 100% do it and do as much of it as you can.
Thank you, Felicity, and I couldn't agree more. So I guess that leads into the start of our conversation is, what does it mean to be a volunteer? Well, what is volunteering to you? So maybe Morgan, what is it to be a volunteer in your mind? And why do you volunteer?
Yeah, good question. So volunteering is, well, I think we all kind of know the definition of volunteering, but just to do work for organizations, I think the key is that you're passionate about things that you want to be doing outside of your normal studies and your normal kind of vocations and things, which is why I think that's one of the things that is most important to me, especially, and why I volunteer. It's an opportunity to do things beyond what I normally would have done just at university and, you know, in my general career and things. And it's a way to give back, to explore new things, and yeah, gain all of those skills that kind of we've briefly touched on already that you gain from volunteering. I think my kind of journey is a good example of how much you can get out of volunteering, because I didn't do engineering while I was at university. I didn't know what it was. So Robogals goes out into, is an organization we go out and do free robotics workshops in schools, in primary schools and high schools. And I definitely would have benefited, I think, from Robogals coming out to my high school and finding out what engineering was, because I did a lot of physics and maths in high school, but no teacher ever took me aside and kind of suggested engineering. And when I got to university, I was doing neuroscience degree, which was fascinating, but I had heaps of friends doing engineering and I was really quite jealous of what they were doing. And Robogals was an opportunity, volunteering for Robogals while I was at university was an opportunity for me personally to go in and kind of learn like robotics and coding and the basics of engineering. And so I got into the like kind of tech world that way and engineering world that way. So by extensively volunteering for Robogals over a few years while I was at university, and kind of teaching myself all of those concepts. When I graduated, I went and I worked at Microsoft. So that was kind of how I got into the tech world in a bit of a roundabout way, which just wouldn't have been possible without organizations that like Robogals that let you kind of explore your passions outside of the formal education sphere.
It's so interesting that your experience has been not necessarily I guess volunteering to impact others, which you have done, but also how your own personal journey has evolved because of volunteering. So Felicity, is your experience similar? And why do you volunteer?
Well, I don't think I planned to volunteer when I started Parav Engineering, particularly if I knew how much work it would take to start an organisation, because I was probably doing maybe 20, 30 hours a week on it, but I loved it so much. I ended up going down to 4 days a week in my day job as an engineer because I wanted to spend extra time doing it. And yeah, I certainly didn't start out going, I'm going to go volunteer. It started off as I want to go. I got actually really frustrated that there weren't many women in engineering, and I thought, I've got to do something about it. I'm sick of reading reports. I'm sick of complaining about it. I've actually got to go take action. So for me, it was a way that I could see I could go take action. And that led to then, yeah, starting an organization. Again, didn't plan on doing that. That's kind of just what was the best way to make this thing that I wanted to do happen. So it was a bit of a different kind of pathway, and I've gotten, I think, you know, I feel like my whole life out of it. I think I've learned more volunteering than I have in my day job as an engineer. I've been able to explore opportunities that I would never have the chance to, and it helped me also step into being a leader. And even though I was a graduate at work, I could actually go take on a leadership opportunity and I could try and experiment things. And I think as engineers, I find it challenging often at work to really take big risks because, you know, my career is on the line and I don't want to look bad in front of my boss, or I don't want to make a big mistake in front of the client. So I felt like I could really play and swing out through my volunteering opportunities, and it meant that I could take bigger risks, and I learned a lot more about myself and about my strengths because it was something I could really design and own rather than feeling like I had to kind of slot into a role at work. So I felt it's been really beneficial for me to explore different opportunities. And the thing about volunteering is there's so many opportunities out there that you can really create yourself. You don't need to go, oh, I'm going to go do X responsibility. You can actually create those opportunities yourself. So you can find one where you can really explore those different skills.
Great. And I think, Fons, you have a good example of that, having started an organisation yourself. I guess, what was your experience in starting Green Deal for Youth, and why do you volunteer?
Yeah, so let's start with the last question. So what volunteering means for me is actually caring for your community. Like, I grew up in a very small village in the southeast, in the rural areas of the Netherlands, where it was very common that everybody plays a role in the village, with hosting festivals, with caring for your like your neighbors, going on a collection for a good cause. And that mentality I just brought along. So one of the, like the notion of community just grew bigger. So when I went through my university and I was in my gap year, like our university wanted to implement evening lectures, and all the study associations and students said, hey, we need to do something against it. And the legal ways of the democratic student board was not enough. So I volunteered to take care of our community and to take up the advocacy work. And actually, afterwards, I like decided about, yeah, why not do public affairs and advocacy also like in my field of engineering, because I see that very few engineers take a proactive societal role to discuss with politicians, with other NGOs, how the future will look like. So that was the role that I initially took in the Netherlands via the National Chemical Association. And then afterwards, because a lot of Dutchmen are also engaged in the European Green Deal, like the Commissioner for Climate, Frans Timmermans, he is a Dutchman, and one of his colleagues actually was taking part also in the Dutch Climate Agreement. So I was talking with friends to Sweden about, yeah, why are we not doing also something similar on European level? So we just created a network, which hopefully will become a more formal organization on European level, but the Dutch one is already like an official NGO with 700 ambassadors.
Amazing. It's so interesting to see the diverse range of why people volunteer, from inspiring others and going out to minority groups, in particular young women, to increase the number of women in engineering, to developing your own leadership skills and having the opportunity to try new things without the pressures of your daily work as an engineer, and then the third side being the advocacy and being out there and having a voice. And I think there's such a potential for engineers and the way we work to really change and influence policy. So we've touched on it a little bit already, but the benefits of engineering. So we've talked about the skills, but are there specific skills? We'll start with Felicity, because you touched on it as well. Are there specific skills that you've had the opportunity to develop through volunteering that you wouldn't have had in your everyday life?
So many. I think when you start off as a graduate engineer, you often don't get exposure to how a business runs and your role in the context of the business. You know, there's so much to learn when you first start out as an engineer, and often you're quite technically focused. So the key things that I've learned are around how do you look at really basic stuff like a profit and loss statement, running a budget, setting up governance of an organization was a really big one. What's an advisory board? What do they do? What role do they play? Anything really to do with business I learned. And even though it is a not-for-profit, we've always operated like a full business where we get our finances audited and things like that. So that was a big learning for me. And I was really surprised at how there was so many parallels, and what really made a difference for me was having really amazing mentors who did have experience in business, and they actually said, I'm experiencing this on my project and it's a X billion-dollar project. So the things that were happening in our teeny tiny little startup organization, they were experiencing too. So definitely a lot around business, also around being commercial, like you've got to make money, pay the bills, that kind of thing. And then definitely leadership and people. I think one of the big mistakes we made early on was because I wasn't clear around here's your role and here's what you need to do, we burnt out a lot of people. A lot of people got real, I think this happens a lot with volunteers, a lot of people got really excited, came to volunteer, and then put everything in it, and then it was just too much. So getting the people balance right, and we did have a lot of volunteers leave, but that really taught me how to best share a vision with somebody as a leader, but then also help them in their journey along the way in achieving the goals that they want. So yeah, so many. I feel like I could talk for hours about all the different skills because it's been so valuable for me.
Amazing. And I couldn't agree more, just with the amount that you learn that you wouldn't necessarily learn in the everyday work as an engineer. And Morgan, having not come from the engineering background yourself, what have you found the skills similar to Felicity, or have there been other skills that you've acquired that you wouldn't have elsewise?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Felicity said in terms of those kind of skills that are built up around business, and even like networking skills, which is something that I've just found myself over the years, like looking back being like, oh no, I've learned a lot in that space, and like relationship management and all of that. But I think, and I also agree on the people side of it. I think there's an interesting kind of dimension when you're talking about volunteering and managing volunteers that's completely different to managing employees. And I think you probably learn more managing volunteers than you do managing employees in certain kind of fields within that, just because you need to learn how to tap into people's like intrinsic motivations and work out why people are volunteering and how to kind of steer that in the best direction. And exactly like Felicity said, making sure that volunteers don't burn out as well. So managing, not just getting them going, but then also kind of stopping them to a certain extent, making sure that people aren't doing too much. And then of course, there's the skills that I mentioned before in terms of being able to learn about areas and disciplines and just things that you never would have done without doing those volunteering things. So with me and Robogals, learning how to code and learning how to use robots is just something that wouldn't have come without that volunteer experience. And then, you know, getting into environmental organizations and learning a lot more out of that about like just specifically skills in the area that you're volunteering in. I think that's a huge benefit, especially during university, because you kind of, you know, you're 18, you choose what you're going to do, you jump into uni, and being able to explore all those different interests, being able to pick up skills across all those different disciplines is completely invaluable, I think.
Oh, thank you, Morgan. And I did want to call on, so we did have another panelist who has their video on that many would have been able to see. So I did just want to introduce Firas. Firas is the chair of our Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee. So he's also working through the webinar today. So my apologies for not introducing him earlier, but he also had some insights as to the skills acquired through volunteering. And I guess adding context, the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee is a volunteer-based organisation, and he's will be in the chair role for 4 years. So it's quite a commitment. So Firas, do you have any insights to share?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, for this webinar, and thank you also for the amazing 3 speakers that we're having today. I guess it's very interesting to see all these young peers giving these such webinars. This would be something amazing for all the people who are following the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and basically who are also following the work of the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee. You know, this is something mainly related to engineering organizations and mainly related to the activities that is related to the different aspects of our life. Mainly when we speak about engineering, we cannot only speak about from an educational way. We need to look into the impact of engineering and what engineering makes to the society and what impact has engineering on our lives. So when we speak, someone at this webinar speaking about volunteering, we need to make sure that several people in the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee or other committees volunteer for a variety of reasons. You know, for some, volunteering offers a chance to give something back to the community or to make a difference. Also for others, and especially for young professionals, will provide an opportunity to develop new skills or build an existing experience and knowledge. So we all know that volunteering is best known as an act done for the benefit of others, but definitely there are always several lessons that can be taken all the way. And when I'm stressing about engineering or fresh engineers, because volunteering will definitely help these young peers to develop skills, from soft skills such as leadership, communication, and presentation skills, also professional skills, and definitely business skills. So if we look into it, all in all, we need always to highlight on the importance of volunteering in the different organizations, and always stress on the importance for volunteering to develop employment capabilities and other skills which will be very essentials in the future market of work.
Thank you, Firas. And And I guess looking from the different side of things, from the advocacy space, Fons, have you found that you've acquired different skills to Felicity and Morgan, or similar, even if you're working in a different space?
Yes, absolutely. Because with biotechnology, you're not learning about like the bigger role of society and how you engage actually with NGOs. Biotechnology is a very controversial study in the sense that you can really cure people with new types of medicines. With vaccines, also in some areas in Europe are getting controversial just as much as in the USA, which makes me really worried. And it also explains the role for like proactive people in engineering that explain how biology works, how vaccines works. And most of these things you're learning the theory in class, but the informal education by volunteering actually empowers you to bring that into practice. So with the skills that I see, with the soft skills, the network, it also brings you also personal skills, because indeed you learn about your limits, you learn about your strengths. And personally, I actually also learn more my role, that I really want to be in the interchanging phase between technology and society. Whether first, I think that I will do that like after I'm graduating in February, to pursue that area of field, while maybe staying in one very specific technological field. What I want to do to make our industry more sustainable. So I think that's the added value of volunteering.
So in addition to the skills that we're acquiring through our volunteering, we've talked about inspiring others or motivating others, whether it's getting them on the same wavelength in terms of the advocacy work and fighting for climate change, whether it's in inspiring others to volunteer in themselves. And I guess, do you have any tips as to, if people are volunteering, how do you motivate others and how do you bring others along for the journey? So maybe we'll start with you, Morgan. How do you, because Robogals is like, you have over 1,000 volunteers worldwide. So how do you inspire them and how do you motivate others?
Yeah, we do. And I think the global nature and how big the organization is such an asset. And it's that in itself, I find is really motivating for myself and also others, having a global network of thousands of volunteers that are all dedicated and working towards and passionate about the same goal, getting and inspiring girls into engineering. So that is one really powerful aspect, is the network aspect of it, and being surrounded by people that are just as passionate as you are and are working really hard towards the same goal. I think a lot of it does come down to communication, and that's definitely a skill that you learn being a leader in a volunteer organization, is being able to communicate, not just continuing to keep the momentum up in terms of your missions and vision and everything, but then also articulating the strategy, articulating how people fit in. People like to know what they're doing and how that kind of contributes to the whole. So being able to articulate that. I think on an individual level, it is about tapping into each person and what they are passionate about, where their strengths are, and being able to maximize on those. And then I think a big part of it also comes down to well-being and making sure that you, it's something that I try and do, is really kind of push that, like, we genuinely care about people and people not burning out, and making sure that they're managing all of that, and that volunteering is just a part of people's lives. It's a part that I think, well, it makes my life a lot better. Being able to do things outside of everyday life, but it is just a part of it. It's not your whole life, and it never really should be, I don't think. So I think it's, a holistic kind of view of it.
It's interesting there that you touched on strategy, and something just to add in from the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee, we've just endorsed our next strategy for the next 4 years. So that will be published on the website in the next few weeks. And for anyone that is interested, you'll be able to see the work that we're doing and how it fits into the bigger strategy of the Sustainable Development Goals and of the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. So it is, I agree, Morgan, it's important to be able to see where you fit in the bigger picture. So thank you for touching on that point. And from your side, Fons, like, how do you motivate others to be in the activism space and to speak out if it's not an area, or if it is an area that can be controversial? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe to also attach to the point that Morgan is making, like sometimes it can happen that your volunteering becomes your job, and then I think you also should look for a secondary volunteering ship to complement it. But I agree with that volunteering sometimes really can complement things. And how I motivate people is like also sharing my motivation and enthusiasm is really like that really makes a lot of people also enthusiastic about the vision that you have together. And be patient and value also the process for the people when you're taking that, and also create milestones and celebrate them. That is very important because then people know where they are leading towards instead of the bigger goal with climate action. So yeah, what also very much happened is sometimes people just drop off. Like we are a larger network with around 80 people in our WhatsApp group. We had various events, one in Cyprus and in the Netherlands and in Italy. And yeah, like you also have to get people in, and maybe you have to leave them, unfortunately. But it's like the journey that you have as persons together that you value very much. So when you see them again in another stage, you have a positive feeling again, and you can talk back about the times that you had. Yeah.
Amazing. And it's about the energy that you possess. And I guess leading into the work that you've done, Felicity, the Power of Engineering organization works across multiple cities. How do you motivate others when you're not in the same location as them?
Oh, great question. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, motivation, particularly from that volunteering perspective. And I think Morgan and Fons touched on it in what they were sharing. Was the first thing is really that why, getting them. You can kind of tell, I think, when you have that first conversation with a volunteer, if they're in it just to put something on their CV, or like I've literally had people tell me, I've been told I have to volunteer as part of my degree, so that's why I'm doing it. And you instantly go, nah, they're not going to be a project manager. And we have actually said yes to people who have said that, and it always has turned out badly. So, you're like desperate, I just need someone on this project, I just can't do it all. And I've been in that situation before. So I think the first thing is that why, and having that real passion shine through. I think you can really tell that passion from people. And then whenever I meet a new volunteer or someone who's working in my team, I always say, what is your goal and how can we help you achieve that? So they're not going to be motivated and actually want to stay in the organization if we're not going to help them get something out of it. So I always say, this is your chance to be selfish. What do you want and how can I help you get that? And so being really clear about that. And then that helps me as a leader be kind of on the hook for them, because that if they're not getting that, then that's like my job to make sure that they're getting that out of the organization. And then I think what has them stay is the culture. And that's something that's been really surprising for me. And I didn't sort of intend to start out with like, here's what the culture is going to look like. I think I really just lived through my values. So we had a really incredible leadership team who had the same values. And I know often in workplaces, particularly in engineering, it can be quite a challenging work environment, quite demanding. And so I think people really appreciated that they had this safe, authentic space that they could be in. So I think having that positive culture for people where they feel like they really belong and they're really included has them stay within the organization. And I'd also have to say, I've actually also fired volunteers, which is probably, I don't like talking about that, but I have actually said to people, what's the best thing for this organization? You need, like, it wasn't just like you're fired. We had a longer conversation, performance management, go through a process. But I think that's also important too, to really look at the people who are not working for your organization as well. And that really sets the standard for everyone else. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Maybe I'm a hard taskmaster, but I think you can still have all of those things come across remotely. And I think particularly young people are very well-versed in working remotely these days. And what some of the feedback we had from our volunteers, particularly during COVID, was I felt adapting was much easier because I'd volunteered with Power of Engineering for so long and I'm so used to doing things remotely. It was almost like remote first was kind of our way of working. So that's enabled us, I think, with that passion of people to be okay remotely.
There's so many good points in there, from understanding, firstly, when you start in an organization, asking the question, why are you here? And I know that's something that Firas and I have had a conversation about when I started to understand what the purpose was or what I was doing. I had the same conversation with my local engineering group to say, this is what I want to achieve. So asking that selfish question first, but then looking at, okay, where do they fit within the bigger organization and where can they help? And if it comes to the point where they're not the best fit for the organization, it's just having that honest conversation, which again is skills that you wouldn't necessarily have in your full-time work until you've had 10, 15, 20 years experience. So it is so valuable to have that experience behind you. So linking in, and I think it may be hard for people to identify, but what is your favorite memory or experience in volunteering? So I'm going to put Morgan on the spot first. What is your favorite experience volunteering?
Oh, it's a tricky one. It's really hard to narrow down a lot of years volunteering into one moment, but I think probably something that, can I do two? I'll do one. Okay.
I'll allow two.
Well, something that really stands out for me is, I mentioned before that, like, how powerful it is to have that network of other volunteers around the world and everything that are working towards the same thing and are passionate about the same things as you. And I think that really stood out to me the first conference I went to, Robogals conference that I went to in Melbourne, it was. And I'm based in Canberra, so I got to travel for it. It was very exciting, pre-COVID days, obviously. And just to be in the lecture hall that we walked into with hundreds of volunteers from all around the Asia Pacific region, all talking about Robogals, buzzing about, you know, being enthusiastic about everything that was going on, was a real game changer for me. It was, I think, Felicity said, like, with getting girls and women into STEM, it's often just like reading reports, going to panels where people talk about how dire it is, all of that. And to be in a room with so many people that care so much and then actually doing something about it was, yeah, it changed my life, I think. And it changed the whole trajectory of my career and my life as well, being part of such a amazingly positive organization. So that's probably mine.
What about yourself, Fons? What's your favorite memory volunteering?
Yeah, like when we were active with the young professionals for the Dutch Climate Agreement, I got to know so many young green leaders within the engineering firms that are just making the new technologies possible. For instance, to make steel. So we got an invitation to go with the young professionals from Tata Steel on the north of Amsterdam to visit their industry park. So I really was seeing how steel was produced, which is completely different than my studies in biotechnology. And we had a major discussion with like some people in that working field about what's the future of sustainable steel making, because all these companies will transition in the coming 5, 10, 20 years. In the Netherlands, they are having the big discussions right now. And that was amazing to hear about that. Engineers really discuss about how the future really will look like in that small piece of how our society is constructed. That was an amazing experience that I really value to witness.
I'll say, as a structural engineer, the idea of understanding how steel's made and how it could become more climate friendly is a very interesting topic. So Felicity, what about yourself? What's your favorite memory of volunteering?
It is very hard to pick one. I feel like, I don't know if you guys on the call experience is like a flashback, like you said, Morgan, like the last 6 years of all these amazing experiences. I'm going to go with two as well. I can't pick. When we went into the Qantas A380 hangar on our site tour, I think I also think it's important to reward our volunteers. So when we do have companies like Qantas giving us great opportunities like that, I make sure people are getting involved too, and it's a great experience. So getting a tour of the A380, going to first class, going to the tires, doing all the cool stuff was really awesome. But probably which tops that is when I met 3 incredible young women who came to our event in 2012, and they changed their mind about engineering, and then I met them when they graduated university. And so that was it was like, I don't know, birthing children of like, oh my gosh, these like people that we've met and worked with so many years ago. And it's such a long journey to go from when they're in year 9 and 10 at school all the way through. And I guess, you know, that made sense. That was the intention of why we started Power of Engineering. But then when that moment finally happened and it was 7 years later, you go, oh my gosh, all of those hours, all of that stress was so worth it just to meet these amazing young women. And I know there's more out there, but it just makes it all worthwhile, all of that effort.
I couldn't agree more, and I'll share one of my experiences through Robogals was when I was contacted by a student at the Loughborough University in the United Kingdom, and they contacted me and said, I'm just started my engineering degree and I chose engineering because I was a student in a Robogals workshop. And to hear that what you're doing and what you're volunteering for has not only inspired them to do engineering, but also inspired them. They wanted to start a new Robogals club at their university to inspire others. And to be able to see that cycle is so powerful and so meaningful. Firas, did you have any favourite memories? So you've been with the World Federation for a few years now. What are your favourite volunteering memory?
Yeah, if you go back to the memory, it's not related to the engineering. It will be like, okay. Some years ago back, it's like volunteering in one of the charity associations in my town, which helped elderly people and disabled people. You know, you get to connect with these people. You get to do something which, in a way or another, you're giving back to your society. It's not always volunteering is not always at our early beginnings is related to our studies or our careers. Sometimes it's related to the simple things that we give to others, and that at some point it makes us feel that we're connected with our community. Sometimes you can do things which can contribute to a cause that you care about, and maybe sometimes I feel that like what I've done at that time, it was just simply enjoying a meaningful conversation for people who needed some support. So this is what I remember from the early beginnings.
Fantastic. And those conversations can make such an impact on our lives and things that we remember. So before we move into sort of the final few questions, before we open it up for Q&A, I did want to touch on the fact that this is the global group for young engineers, future leaders. And I see that we've got a few people on the line, and I'd really like to know where everyone's from and where everyone's dialing in from. So if you can open up the chat window in your Zoom and just type in sort of where you're calling from today, it would be great to see the diversity that we've got listening in. And just as an overview of our panelists, as spoken about, Felicity and I are in the same city in Melbourne in Australia. Morgan's calling in from Canberra, our capital city. Fons is in the Netherlands and Firas is in Lebanon. So we've got quite a diverse group within our speaking panel today. So if you're able to open up the chat window down the bottom and share with the panelists where you're from, we'd love to hear from you. And I will share one point. We have had someone send through just a comment within our Google Drive. So if you do have any comments on any topic related to what's been discussed, please do add them in. And we've had Nicole, great name, from Rwanda, who has an organisation called Power Her, who has commented that volunteering is a great activity as you can impact so many others and grow throughout it. So couldn't agree more with you, Nicole. And I appreciate your comment. So if anyone does have any questions, please do add them in. The link's just been reshared. So as people are adding some questions in, we've had people dialing in. We've got someone from Ghana in, which is fantastic. So please keep adding where your countries are from. It's great to see where people are calling in from. But I'll ask the panelists while we're doing that and while we're waiting, is that if people are looking to volunteer, what's a piece of advice that you can get someone if they haven't volunteered before and they're wanting to start, what would you suggest they do? So Felicity, I might start with you.
Oh, it's a tough one, Nicole. I'm just thinking of what I would do. I think whenever I'm trying to make a decision about something, I always look at what are my goals and what's my direction and where am I going. So if you had a goal to be a leader, or you had a goal to learn about a different industry, or it could be to make a difference or make an impact in something that's important to you, I get really clear on your goal first, because then that determines what your why is of why you would go volunteer. So I spend some time thinking and reflecting, and I think often we don't really take the time out of our day to think and reflect about what's important to us. So I'd start there, and then could be lots of organizations that are doing what you're doing already. At the time that I started Power of Engineering, there wasn't really anyone focused on year 9 and 10 and focused on girls. And we focused on 9 and 10, so that's middle school in Australia, but that's where you choose your subjects before you go on to your final years of study at school. So that was really important for us. So we got really focused on the impact we wanted to make, and so that people weren't doing that. But there could be lots of organizations out there who are doing something similar to you, and it's a great way to learn from. So I'd also research on, is there an organisation that is doing something similar in terms of your goals or your passions? And I think it's also really helpful to ask mentors or people who are experienced volunteers. I'm sure the other panelists wouldn't mind me saying this. Feel free to reach out to us afterwards, or add me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat through goals or anything like that. But I think asking other people what has been your experience, because you can learn so much more from other people's mistakes, learn from my failures, don't repeat them, than going out and making those mistakes yourself.
Thank you, Felicity. And I know that personally, you've helped me a lot grow along the way, and it's the importance of finding those mentors and understanding why you're volunteering. So Morgan, what are your thoughts, and what a piece of advice for those that have never volunteered before?
Yeah, once again, agree with what you said, Felicity, but I think there's also another element of, even if you don't know where you want to end up or what you want to be doing, following your curiosity. I think it's quite important to not discount things that you're curious about just because you might think it doesn't fit into your kind of like picture of how you think your life is going to go. And volunteering is the perfect way to explore those kind of like tendrils that sometimes get sparked when you hear about an organization or you hear about a volunteering opportunity. So I think obviously within the bounds of time and resources that you have available, if there's something that really you find yourself curious about and wanting to learn more about, I think it's a good thing to follow.
Couldn't agree more, and just having the courage to follow your curiosity wherever it may lead. And yeah. I've been to a presentation where someone describes a life as a jungle gym as opposed to a ladder. And it was all about, it's not necessarily an upwards trajectory, but it's one that you can climb in any direction, forwards, backwards, upside down. And it's just about following your curiosity. So just updating, people are sending through where they're dialing in from, which is fantastic. As I said, we've got someone from Ghana. We have Wenjing, who's from the University of Queensland in Brisbane. We have John, who's calling in from Durban in South Africa, which is welcome to both of you. Thank you for sharing. And I'll move on to Fons. What's your piece of advice for those who haven't volunteered before?
Yeah, so I specifically want to address that to people that want to do something on climate, because like in 2019, we've seen so many pupils from secondary schools and universities going on the streets to demand climate action. And what is really big challenges about how to get to the next step, how to reach the policymakers, or how to really change something within companies or within the local authorities. So in the Netherlands, a good acquaintance of mine, he just made a website called surebuthow.com, where all the volunteering options on climate action and environment actually displayed. And there's a questionnaire which you can just fill in, and then the most relevant ones come out. I will share one in the chat later on. So indeed, ask yourself what you want to do, but I'll definitely also talk with others, because your family and your friends also know what really motivates you, even though maybe you are not that much self-aware about it. And also talk with your national chemical engineering association, what kind of opportunities there are, because what I often see is that people that take leadership often have taken up like small volunteering tasks becoming bigger. And most of the things start local. As I explained me, and also maybe what Firas also showed, it's like some of the small things start local by just asking your family, your neighborhood, or your municipality what you can do, and offering your skills that you have or the knowledge, because often people can help each other a lot.
Thank you, Fons. And there is such a strong component about helping people. And I did want to share a story while I see a few people are typing in questions into the chat of a story, and he's on the line today, but Michael, who's the Young Engineers Future Leaders representative from South Africa, shared a story at our last national meeting around a young community, or a small community in South Africa, which reached out to their Young Engineers group about the need for a dam and understanding what they could do as young engineers. And Michael, I hope you don't mind me sharing this story, but it was one that inspired me, and it was amazing to hear that he took it under his wing and traveled out there to the community and asked them what he could do to help, and understood and had that conversation. And through his volunteer work, they're able to put together and support a local community. that wouldn't necessarily get help afterward any other way. So there's so many different opportunities to get involved, and as the advice has been given is find your passion, talk to people that know you best, and work out what inspires you. As Fons said, it does usually start at a local level and grow to be something bigger, or you're working with the local community and making such a difference. So we have a few more people from Ghana joining in. Welcome. We have people joining from Myanmar, and currently volunteering with the Federation of Myanmar Engineering Organisation since 2012. That's amazing, 8 years with an organisation, congratulations. And we do have a question that's come through. So I'll start on the general questions. So when you are a volunteer, we have to face some challenges and difficulties, and I'd like to know how to overcome these and solve it. So when you're faced with a challenge in your workplace, if there is a specific challenge you're asking about, Thor, please do add it in. But if you're faced with a challenge, Morgan, in your work or in your volunteer work, how do you address it? What's the first thing that you would do?
I think, as has been mentioned a few times from the panelists, we all have incredible support networks. I think that we should be leaning on more. I speak for myself, should be leaning on more. And that's probably the biggest thing that I would do, is reach out to mentors, to people on the board, the other volunteers that I have around me, and then also people completely separate in different contexts as well, who don't know the Robogals context, if that's where the challenge is, to get a completely different perspective as well. So I like talking things out and kind of processing things that way, and just making sure that I'm getting as many different perspectives as possible from different people, and also talking to people who are directly impacted by whatever the challenge is as well, to make sure that I get the kind of right information and all the different perspectives from the people involved, to make sure that I'm not kind of being blinkered about what I think the approach is, but stepping back and getting as much kind of information as I can and working out how to process it from there. So I think, yeah, talking to as many people as possible is the way that I tend to tackle things.
What about you, Felicity? Have you got a similar approach?
I do have a very similar approach. I've got my, best mate on speed dial and my mentors and all that, which I definitely ask for help. And I think what came to mind as you're sharing, Morgan, it was so helpful, another flashback of a challenging time. And it was around when we had those volunteers that we needed to let go. And the thing that made it kind of the context that I brought to it was what's best for the organisation. And there's certainly things that I personally want to do, like avoid the difficult conversation, or just put it off, or just like hope they leave and just phase out, or those kinds of things. But then when I really looked at what's best for the organisation, then that's kind of the way that I act. So that's a mindset that I often take into business or organisations, because often what I want to do might not be the best way to solve the challenge. So that's when I'm faced with a challenge, I'll take that perspective for the organisation.
Very good. And Fons, in the activism and the climate space, I'm guessing you're faced with quite a few challenges. What's your general approach to facing these?
Yeah, let me say that like climate change and also the burden that puts on our generation really sometimes makes mental problems, what I see around me. And so self-care and also being environmental health, and they are a lot of promoted among a lot of green NGOs. So it's with activism, often you work with pushes, with campaigns. So you are really active and then you do a little bit less in order to recover. And that's already a lot in the culture. With team dynamics, often if we face problems, we have like every year we have at least 2 weekends that we spend together with most of the volunteers to really sit down together and to think about the next milestones, also what things went well, what didn't. And the major challenge that what we face in the climate scene is, we know there's like this big challenge, all these different sectors with mobility, energy, housing, agriculture, all of them need to change in many ways, and in that different ways in different countries. So yeah, what we just do is just pick one thing and do it right instead of focusing all your attention on all these various things. Even though they are interconnected, if everybody or every group takes one small piece, then it becomes much more effective.
That's such an important point you raise around the mental health as well. And I think it can happen with volunteers that you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. And we are all human. And yes, one person can make a difference, but it's by working together and supporting each other that we can really make an impact. So thank you for raising that, Fons. That's a very important point to be able to raise. We do have another question that's come through that Firas, I think you might be able to answer, is around how to actually get involved with the volunteering. I know we have shared the links to our 3 speakers volunteering groups that you can research and have a bit of a look and reach out. But Firas, are there ways for people in this call to get involved with the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee, and where can they find the information?
The thing is that our committee is related to the is part of the WFEO, and members of the committee needs to be official representatives of the national members or the countries which constitute the WFEO. However, there are still like many opportunities for engineers, young engineers, to be part of the of this committee by contributing some time in volunteering in the activities of this committee. We're doing this these webinars as part of the series related for the engineering of the future. So we're always looking for volunteers to participate in us and getting new ideas for the committee, and which will help us to implement our strategy, which we are implementing for the coming 3 years. I would always say that for young engineers, they need to follow up us on our website and on the WFEO channels, on the YouTube and the Twitter account. Follow us on our activities, and we'll also be asking for participation of young engineers in volunteering in the working groups of the committee. We'll be forming like 2 or 3 working groups. One of the working group will be focusing on issues related to climate action. And I guess that several people, engineers who are loving or who are caring to volunteer would find it a good opportunity to volunteer in something professional and something within their career.
Thank you very much, Firas. And I know one activity, as Firas said, we've got working groups that we'll be establishing, but we'll also be running an exciting event for the World Engineering Day next year on March the 4th. So that will be something that anybody around the world can be a part of. So please look out for that on our social media channels. So another question that's come through is around how to encourage engineers to become volunteers, especially during this pandemic. Has anybody, I guess this year has been a unique year for everybody around the world, and it has been challenging for everybody and in different ways. So with your volunteering, has that changed during the pandemic, and how has your organisation adjusted? So Morgan, how has Robogals dealt with the pandemic?
Yeah,
and how do you, question. I guess, encourage people to continue volunteering?
Yeah, and especially because Robogals is all around the world, and even like within Australia, especially during like the Melbourne lockdown, every city was at a different point and still is kind of at a different point, and then you chuck in the rest of the world, and we're really dealing with lots of different situations. But I think what has been really powerful is that because everyone is in a different situation at the moment, but we're all still with part of the same organization and part of the same community. So being able to talk to people that are in that are doing different things to you at this point in time, sharing ideas, sharing resources, and really building upon that sense of community has been super important throughout the pandemic, and super important, I think, for keeping people engaged in volunteering as well. One thing I will mention that has been really interesting is with our engagement with industry partners and companies and things, there's been a real uptake in companies wanting to get directly involved and directly volunteer with Robogals. And I think a big part of that is because people are working from home and companies are wanting to like enrich their employees and offer them more opportunities beyond just their day-to-day work. So that's been quite an interesting shift that I've seen over the last year.
Great. Thanks, Morgan. What about yourself, Fons? Have you noticed a change this year?
Yeah, like even though people are not managed to lobby, for instance, in person, like digital activism just continues, as you may have seen with Fridays for Future on digital. But the coolest things that I've seen along in the field was, for instance, by Yes Europe, which are the young energy specialists. They hosted a climathon with 300 people in Slack, where a full weekend they worked on new ideas how to like make Europe more sustainable with the challenges in the energy system and also materials. And with our group, with Green Deal for Youth, we actually hosted an online brainstorm session on the European Climate Pact, which is the social agenda of the European Green Deal. And actually the power of Zoom and online platforms actually became very vivid, because you just make breakout rooms, you discuss the very specific things in the platform, and actually the outcome was even more better than I had when we met physically with a youth summit in the Netherlands regarding the European Green Deal. So yeah, actually some things actually went better, and but you have to rethink about your event setup.
And it's all about that resilience and finding new ways to do things. And it's great to hear that so many positives have come out of a terrible situation. And what about yourself, Felicity? Have you noticed a change?
So the main thing we do is face-to-face events. So yes, is the short answer. And right before the pandemic, we had gotten on board a new team of 8 incredible people, and then done our planning day, and we're all ready to go. But what has been really helpful is meant that the team's actually been able to be onboarded in a really sustainable way, rather than just going, here, you're onboarded, plus we're doing these events, go, have fun. So that's been really, really nice to have that experience for them. And it's meant that they've also been able to really take a step back and look at our strategy over the long term. So I think it's been a really beneficial year to take stock, really think deeply about the organisation, and have a bit of a reset and a focus. And I think there's some other opportunities that have come out of it, like my brother-in-law is actually in London, and he was working, the positions he was in were reduced because of COVID. So he's actually really passionate about the circular economy. So he was like, well, I want to go work on a project in this. So he volunteered himself as an intern for 6 weeks and created his own project in a, having a bit of a career pivot. So he took an opportunity where I've got all this time available. How could I make it into something where I could volunteer and also build my skills? So I think there's been some interesting opportunities like that as well.
It's great to see how people have reacted and seen it as an opportunity while dealing with so much grief and uncertainty in the world. So we are at time, so I'll ask one last question to all panelists, and it might be the hardest one that you've had, but I will ask each panelist, if you would describe your volunteering experience in one word, what would it be? In one word. Felicity.
Unbelievable.
Fons.
Sustainability.
Morgan.
Inspiring.
And mine would be amazing. So I wanted to thank each of you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this session. It's so inspiring and amazing, and just to be able to see and hear from how different people are volunteering in different ways around the world, whether it's in outreach, whether it's in leadership, whether it's in climate change, in activism. So thank you all for being a part of this session. I think Felicity mentioned it. Please do have a look at each of the websites associated with each of the people and the speakers. Fons has kindly shared quite a few links to different organisations around climate change. Do feel free to connect with speakers on LinkedIn, or if you have any questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. So thank you to all those that contributed, people from Ghana, South Africa, Myanmar, from the Netherlands, from Australia. Just thank you to everyone who has been involved. And I'll pass over to Firas to just end this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Thank you for moderating today's webinar. I would like to thank everyone from the attendees, and I will express my gratitude for the speakers. You've done something amazing today for all our followers, and I really appreciate the time that you have given us today to be part of this webinar. I hope that we collaborate in future activities related to the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee, and I would like to ask everyone to follow our future activities, and probably we'll be preparing something for the World Engineering Day in March 4. We would like to collaborate with really inspiring people, so that we all contribute together for the best for our societies and organizations. Thank you very much.